Ladies and gentlemen, history isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a tapestry woven with human ambition, profound errors, incredible bravery, and the relentless march of technological innovation. Today, we're going to pull back a corner of that tapestry to reveal a story from the heart of World War II, an audacious gamble that would redefine Allied warfare, expose bitter rivalries, and ultimately carve a path toward victory in Europe. Imagine a world engulfed in the most destructive conflict humanity had ever known. It's July 1943, and the Allied forces, fresh from a decisive victory in North Africa, stand on the threshold of a new, perilous chapter. Their gaze falls upon Sicily, a sun-drenched island in the Mediterranean, seemingly insignificant on a global map, yet strategically vital. This wasn't just another island to conquer. It was a stepping stone, a declaration of intent, and a monumental test of an alliance still finding its footing. The operation was code-named Husky, and it would prove to be a masterclass in chaotic brilliance, a stark lesson in the unpredictable nature of war, and a testament to the enduring power of human resilience. Why Sicily? The reasons were multifaceted, converging like lines on a battle map. First, there was the imperative of securing the Mediterranean. Control of this vital waterway meant freedom of movement for Allied shipping, unimpeded supply lines, and the ability to project power deeper into Axis-occupied Europe. Bombers, no longer constrained by distant airfields, could reach targets previously thought untouchable. Secondly, it was about Italy, the so-called soft underbelly of Europe. The hope was that an invasion of Sicily would be a direct thrust at the heart of fascist Italy, potentially forcing them out of the war entirely. This was more of a fervent hope than a cold calculation, but a hope nonetheless, bolstered by intelligence suggesting growing dissent within Italy. And then there was the geopolitical chess game. Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union, had been relentlessly pressing the Western Allies to open a second front in Europe, to relieve the immense pressure on his forces battling the Germans on the Eastern Front. While not the large-scale Western Front Stalin envisioned, an invasion of Sicily and Italy would at least demonstrate a commitment to engage the Axis on a new European battlefield. It was a gesture, perhaps, but a politically crucial one, especially as German forces launched their massive summer offensive at Kursk, a battle that would determine the fate of the Eastern Front. The stakes, both military and political, couldn't have been higher. But before a single boot could touch Sicilian soil, a different kind of battle had to be won. The battle for deception. War, after all, is as much about trickery as it is about firepower. Enter Operation Mincemeat, a story that sounds like it was plucked straight from a spy novel. Allied intelligence operatives concocted an elaborate ruse. They planted fake invasion plans for Greece on the corpse of a supposed Royal Marines officer, then cleverly dropped it off the Spanish coast, knowing it would be discovered by Axis agents. The Germans, ever vigilant for any scrap of intelligence, swallowed the bait hook, line, and sinker. Divisions that could have bolstered Sicilian defenses were instead redeployed to Greece, anticipating an invasion that would never come. Simultaneously, Allied air raids pounded Sardinia, further muddying the waters about the true target. This wasn't just about misleading the enemy. It was about shaping their reality, making them see what you wanted them to see, and crucially, diverting their precious resources. It's a powerful reminder that in warfare, the mind can be as potent a weapon as any tank or bomber. The invasion itself would be commanded by British Field Marshal Harold Alexander, leading the newly formed 15th Army Group. This massive force comprised the British 8th Army, under the brilliant but often infuriating General Bernard Montgomery, and the USS Seventh Army, led by the equally brilliant, equally infuriating, and undeniably charismatic General George S. Patton. Together, they would field an initial invasion force of roughly 160,000 men, supported by 600 tanks and 1,800 artillery pieces. Their air cover was formidable. Some 4,000 Allied aircraft of the Mediterranean Air Command, operating from North Africa and Malta, with the critical mission of seizing air superiority, interdicting the island, and providing close air support. Against this juggernaut stood General Alfredo Guzzoni's Italian Sixth Army, numbering around 200,000 combat troops with 260 tanks and armored cars. However, this seemingly impressive number masked a critical weakness. 6 of his 10 divisions were static coastal defense units, poorly equipped and often poorly motivated. Reinforcing them were up to 30,000 German troops, primarily from the elite 15th Panzer Grenadier Division and the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. These German units, though considered superior, were themselves under-equipped and filled with replacement soldiers after suffering heavy losses on the Eastern Front. Yet, they still possessed formidable punch, able to field around 100 Panzer IIIs and IVs, and critically, 17 of the dreaded Tiger tanks. In the air, the Axis had up to 1,600 aircraft spread across bases in Sicily, Sardinia, and Italy. But the Italian Air Force, the Regia Aeronautica, was plagued by obsolete equipment and internal struggles, often unable to contest Allied air superiority effectively. This disparity in quality, despite numerical closeness in some areas, would prove decisive. The stage was set, but behind the scenes, a different kind of battle was raging. The Allied ground commanders, Montgomery and Patton, both veterans of the North African campaign, were famously critical of the invasion plan from its inception. They were 2 titans of command, each with massive egos and strong opinions, and their personal rivalries were legendary. Montgomery, meticulous and cautious, and Patton, aggressive and audacious, were like oil and water, and their clashes would become a defining feature of the campaign. They argued vehemently for using their seasoned North African veterans, but Alexander, perhaps hoping to broaden the experience base for future operations, encouraged the use of fresh troops. This decision, while perhaps strategically sound in the long run for building a larger, experienced force, would come at a high cost in the initial landings. A major concern for the landing force was Axis air power. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, recognizing this threat, championed the strategy of capturing and utilizing the well-built enemy airfields in southeast Sicily. This pragmatic approach would allow Allied fighter units to operate directly from the island, eliminating the long and vulnerable flights from Malta. It was a forward-thinking move that emphasized the crucial link between air control and ground operations. Patton and Montgomery, predictably, clamored for more immediate close air support during the landings, a direct tactical demand. Tedder, however, held firm, arguing that gaining overall air superiority through bombing enemy airfields was a more strategic and ultimately more effective use of Allied air power. This tension between strategic bombing for air superiority and tactical close air support would be a recurring theme, highlighting the evolving doctrine of air-ground cooperation in World War II. It underscored a fundamental challenge, balancing the immediate, urgent needs of troops under fire with the broader, long-term strategic objectives that would ultimately secure victory. From early June, Allied planners meticulously prepared for the invasion. The sheer scale of the logistical challenge was staggering. Coordinating naval, air, and ground forces from multiple nations, across vast distances, with equipment and personnel. On June 11th, the nearby fortress islands of Pantelleria and Lampedusa were subjected to a relentless naval and aerial bombardment, softening them into submission. Then, on July 2nd, a week before D-Day, Sicily itself, along with targets in southern Italy, came under a ferocious aerial and naval barrage. This wasn't just about destruction, it was about disruption. Supply lines were severed, airfields cratered, and defenses systematically pulverized. The impact was profound. The Axis, recognizing the futility of holding their aircraft on Sicily against such overwhelming air superiority, relocated the vast majority of their planes to mainland Italy. By the time the invasion began, only about 125 Axis planes remained on Sicily, a stark testament to the Mediterranean Air Command's success in achieving regional air dominance. Yet, the German Luftwaffe still retained bomber and fighter reserves on the mainland, a constant threat capable of disrupting any landing. The air war, though seemingly won over Sicily, was far from over. Meanwhile, British and American paratroopers were steeling themselves for their perilous drops. The airborne component of Operation Husky was, by many accounts, hastily developed. Commanders had reservations, and for good reason. The drops were planned for the night of July 9th, shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. Major General Matthew Ridgway, commander of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, voiced grave concerns about friendly fire, a fear that would tragically materialize, and the alarming lack of night-flying experience among American pilots. All told, 5,300 airborne troops were slated to land. U.S. troops would primarily jump from C-47 transport planes, while British paratroopers would arrive on gliders. But even here, critical deficiencies loomed. A shortage of trained glider pilots and inexperienced C-47 pilots in the art of towing gliders. Their mission was clear: seize crucial crossroads and bridges, disrupt Axis counterattacks, and create chaos behind enemy lines, paving the way for the seaborne landings. The 82nd Airborne aimed for high ground around the Piano Lupo junction, while the British 1st Air Landing Brigade targeted the strategically vital Ponte Grande Bridge near Syracuse. The bravery of these men, jumping into the unknown in the dead of night, cannot be overstated. They were, in essence, the tip of the spear, the first to face the enemy, relying on courage, training, and a good deal of luck. But as the first Allied planes, laden with paratroopers and gliders, headed for Sicily, things quickly, terribly, went wrong. The meticulously planned formations dissolved into chaos. Planes towing gliders lost their bearings in the darkness, struggling against strong winds. And then, the anti-aircraft fire began. Tug pilots, instinctively dipping and weaving to avoid incoming shells, prematurely released their gliders. The statistics are horrifying. Of 144 gliders dispatched, only 54 landed on Sicily, and a mere 6 actually hit their intended targets. A staggering 69 gliders may have crashed into the unforgiving sea, likely drowning around 300 paratroopers. This meant that only about 100 men were immediately available to attack their objectives, a fraction of the intended force. The American drop fared little better. Pilots, disoriented and inexperienced in night flying over water, again lost their way. Strong winds buffeted the landing zones, scattering paratroopers far and wide. Less than 200 were immediately available to capture the critical Piano Lupo junction. Many troopers simply landed wherever they could, disoriented but determined, making their way toward the distant sounds of battle. Imagine the terror, the disorientation. Dropped miles off course, alone or in tiny groups, these soldiers, many of them green and facing combat for the first time, were tasked with finding their objectives and engaging a prepared enemy. It's a profound testament to their training and courage that despite these catastrophic misdrops and vastly diminished numbers, Anglo-American troops attacked many of their initial objectives. A single glider team, against all odds, managed to capture the Ponte Grande Bridge. U.S. paratroopers battled fiercely against the defenders of Piano Lupo. Bob Fielder, a U.S. paratrooper, vividly recalled the sudden, terrifying sound of a German machine gun. Suddenly, there was an unmistakable, loud, ripping burst from a rapid-fire German machine gun. Never having heard the sound of 1,200 rounds per minute, I wondered what in the world is that? This visceral experience, the shock of true combat, was the harsh reality for many. At Ponte Grande, Italian troops, supported by mortars and armored cars, launched a ferocious counterattack, whittling down the British paratroopers to a mere 70 men, who desperately awaited relief from the seaborne forces. The airborne phase of Husky was, by any measure, a tactical disaster in terms of precise execution. Yet, in a bizarre twist of fate, the very failures of the airborne drops created an unexpected, albeit unintentional, advantage. The widely dispersed landings, though devastating for the paratroopers, made the invasion appear far larger and more chaotic than it actually was to the Axis command. Enemy forces were stretched thin, occupied dealing with what seemed like a multitude of guerrilla-style attacks across a broad front. While General Guzzoni eventually announced an invasion, Axis command, confused and disoriented by the widespread airborne activity, made no serious effort to counter it directly on the beaches. This confusion provided a critical window for the seaborne landings. Coinciding with the nighttime airdrops were daring coastal commando raids by units like No. 3 Commando and SAS teams. Their mission was crucial: to clear coastal guns and obstacles, silencing the defenses that could wreak havoc on the incoming invasion fleet. At around 3 a.m. on July 10th, the first seaborne units landed on the Piceno Peninsula. The Royal Marines, 1st Canadian, and 51st Highland Divisions came ashore in the darkness, often to find Italian positions abandoned. In many cases, the coastal defenders had simply fled their posts, their morale broken by the preceding bombardments and the uncertainty of the airborne landings. The British 50th and 5th Divisions landed south of Syracuse, encountering similarly light resistance. By 5 a.m., the British and Canadians had secured their beaches, and heavier landing craft began delivering tanks and trucks. Allied troops rapidly seized Piceno Airfield, immediately preparing it for Allied aircraft. In a poignant moment of reunion, the British 50th Division ran into the British paratroopers who had just retreated from Ponte Grande, and together, they swiftly retook the bridge, turning a near catastrophe into a swift victory. The U.S. landings largely proceeded according to plan, despite rough seas. Major General Lucian Truscott's 3rd Division landed first, sweeping towards Licata to secure the left flank of the landing beaches. As they advanced, they systematically knocked out coastal defenses and railway guns, clearing the path for other divisions. To the east, the 45th Division captured the Comiso airfield and secured the right flank. The 1st Infantry Division landed at Gela, including a contingent of French-Moroccan troops. Here, resistance was stiffer, but they managed to take the town by 8 a.m. By this point, the first serious Axis counterattacks began to materialize. General Guzzoni ordered the Livorno and Hermann Göring divisions to move against the U.S. beaches. However, the bombing campaign and widespread paratrooper activity had effectively cut communications, meaning these initial counterattacks were poorly coordinated and piecemeal. To the east, Italian black-shirt militia attacked the Canadians, who easily pushed them back. British troops, meanwhile, were closing in on Syracuse, a major port and a key objective for ensuring continuous naval supply for the British landing forces. Guzzoni had hoped its formidable defenses would hold, but Allied troops entered the city in the afternoon to a reportedly riotous welcome from the locals. Italian units did launch counterattacks towards the city, even deploying captured French R-35 tanks. But by now, British troops had brought up anti-tank guns and established robust defenses. Italian tank commander Adamo Profico recalled the terrifying reality of this engagement. "We left my tank in the lead. After a few hundred meters, my driver turned to me and shouted, 'Mines!' The tracks of our tank had already gone over the first mines, which dutifully went off. The second tank arrived at full speed, and as it took the curve, a gun hit its right tracks. This disabled its steering, and it careened off, rolling down the escarpment. Right on its heels, the third tank arrived, also going at full speed. As soon as it had made the curve, its front was hit." This chilling account vividly illustrates the dangers of armored combat, the fragility of machines, and the constant threat of unseen hazards. It underscores how even in the face of perceived overwhelming force, determined defenders can exact a heavy toll. By the end of D-Day, Allied commanders likely felt a sense of cautious optimism. Their troops were ashore, beachheads were expanding, several captured airfields were already being utilized by Allied fighters, and Syracuse had fallen. The initial phase of Operation Husky, despite the catastrophic airborne setbacks, seemed to be progressing. But beneath this veneer of success, mounting issues and critical lessons were beginning to emerge. The most glaring problem was the devastating human cost of the airborne operations. Of the 5,300 airborne troops dispatched, a shocking number were casualties or simply lost, with only about 2,000 deemed fit for duty the next day. This represented a catastrophic loss of elite fighting power, a direct result of the rushed planning, inexperienced pilots, and the chaos of the night drops. Furthermore, Army commanders on the ground quickly began to complain about a severe lack of air cover. While the Mediterranean Air Command had achieved regional air superiority, their aircraft were primarily occupied with fighter sweeps and fleet escort missions, protecting the vulnerable invasion armada from potential Axis air attacks. Consequently, little close air support was available on D-Day and D+1. This critical void allowed a German Luftwaffe attack against the Gela transport area to slip through, resulting in the sinking of the ammunition ship SS Robert Rowan. This single incident highlighted a crucial communication and doctrinal gap between air and ground forces. Commanders on the ground, fighting for their lives, felt abandoned, while air commanders believed they were fulfilling a higher strategic objective. This tension, the friction between tactical urgency and strategic necessity, would persist throughout the campaign and beyond, becoming a foundational lesson for future combined arms operations. It begged the question, what good is air superiority if it cannot directly protect the men fighting on the ground? The Axis forces, initially shocked and dispersed by the unexpected scale of the landings, were also beginning to recover and reorganize. Now that they had identified the main landing beaches and the composition of Allied forces, General Guzzoni could order more coordinated counterattacks. Battle Group Schmalz, a powerful German mobile unit, moved to block Allied progress towards Augusta, while the Livorno and Hermann Göring divisions mounted a stronger, more organized push against the Gela beachhead. On July 11th, 3 Italo-German columns launched a determined effort to break through to Gela from the west and center. The Americans, initially, managed to repel the Livorno division, inflicting heavy losses. However, the Hermann Göring division's panzers, with their superior armor and firepower, made much better progress against the lighter anti-tank weapons of the U.S. screening forces. This was a moment of acute crisis. German tanks, breaking open the lines, were heading directly for Gela and the beaches, threatening to cut off the American landing force. With Allied tactical support aircraft busy elsewhere, the 1st Infantry Division had to rush anti-tank guns and armor ashore in a desperate bid to stem the tide. The battle for Gela hung in the balance. It was a chaotic, brutal struggle, a testament to the sheer unpredictability of early invasion phases. Imagine the terror of U.S. infantrymen, lightly armed, watching German panzers roll toward them, knowing that their very existence on the beach, indeed the entire invasion, could hinge on their ability to hold. Ultimately, a handful of vulnerable catapult-launched Navy spotter planes, operating under immense risk, were able to direct devastating naval gunfire from the offshore armada. The sheer firepower of the Allied fleet, pouring shells onto the German attacking columns, was decisive. The German attack was halted, shattered by the unseen, overwhelming might of naval artillery. Axis commanders, realizing the futility of further attempts to reach the shore against such a formidable naval presence, withdrew their forces and took up blocking positions around Caltagirone. This battle for Gela, while a victory, came at a cost and significantly slowed the progress of the American 1st and 45th Divisions. It highlighted the immense power of naval support in amphibious operations and the vulnerability of ground forces to concentrated artillery, even from miles offshore. The Luftwaffe, despite its initial reserves, was less successful in providing meaningful support to its ground forces. They could only offer sporadic resistance from the remaining Sicilian airfields. Johannes Steinhoff, a famous German fighter ace from the Jagdgeschwader 52, recounted the desperation in his memoirs. With what we could scrape together of the remnants of the group, we would fly along the north coast, over Etna's crater, towards the Straits of Messina, where we would fling ourselves at the B-17 flying fortresses in a series of uncoordinated attacks. Our numbers were so few that we would do little damage, and even that little depended upon our breaking through to the bombers. This first-hand account speaks volumes about the complete air superiority the Allies had achieved and the sheer, almost suicidal bravery of the few German pilots left to fight a losing battle. It paints a picture of courageous desperation, but also of strategic impotence. To reinforce the beleaguered U.S. troops, another paratrooper drop was planned for late July 11th. But in what would become one of the most tragic and infuriating incidents of the campaign, this drop turned into another disaster. Recent German bomber attacks had put Allied anti-aircraft units, both Army and Navy, on hair-trigger alert. When the ground and naval gunners spotted the friendly C-47s approaching in the darkness, they mistook them for Axis aircraft and opened fire with devastating effect. 23 of the 144 transport planes were lost to friendly fire, resulting in an estimated 90 aircrew and 229 paratrooper casualties. This was not merely a tragic accident. It was a systemic failure. A report by the 82nd Airborne Division squarely blamed a lack of communication and preparation among the ground forces, highlighting the profound dangers of inadequate coordination in combined arms operations. Fleet Commander Admiral Andrew Cunningham, however, placed blame on the pilots for flying outside of agreed air corridors, pointing to a breakdown in discipline and adherence to protocol. Regardless of where the blame ultimately lay, the incident was a horrifying example of the chaos of war, the psychological toll of constant alert, and the deadly consequences of fragmented communication. Imagine being a paratrooper, having survived the perils of an airborne drop, only to be shot down by your own side. The psychological impact on the survivors, and indeed on the entire Allied command, must have been immense. This incident would become a crucial, albeit painful, lesson for future Allied operations, particularly for the Normandy invasions. As the U.S. advance bogged down in the Central Mountains, the British 8th Army, under Montgomery, made better progress along the coast. They took Augusta on July 12th, but resistance from dug-in enemy units was stiffening. a clear sign that the Axis was recovering and organizing its defenses. Montgomery, ever the planner, developed a new strategy to open fresh routes of advance for British troops while continuing his push towards Catania along the coast. He ordered the 30 Corps to swing around Mount Etna from the west, with the ambitious aim of cutting the island in two. However, this bold maneuver required British troops to take over U.S. objectives around Caltagirone and demanded exclusive use of Highway 124, a vital artery. General Patton, predictably, was outraged. To him, this relegated his U.S. forces to a mere supporting role in Montgomery's grand design, a blow to his ego and a challenge to his vision of American military prowess. The two generals, already prickly rivals, now found themselves locked in a strategic tug-of-war. In response to Patton's fierce protests, Alexander, attempting to appease his fiery American commander, and perhaps recognizing the need to maintain morale, allowed the U.S. 3rd Division to advance towards Agrigento. This decision, born of inter-Allied rivalry, would inadvertently spark one of the most infamous races of the war. As Montgomery took increasing control of the Allied offensive, German commanders were also consolidating their defense. General Hans Valentin Hube, commander of the 14th Panzer Corps, effectively took de facto command of the island's defense, a clear indication of German operational superiority over their Italian allies. Incoming German formations, including the elite 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, paratroopers, and the freshly reformed 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, were preparing to reinforce him, signaling a determined German effort to hold Sicily. The tide of battle was shifting from a chaotic invasion to a more organized, grinding conflict against a hardening German defense. On July 13th, Montgomery launched his major push towards Catania. The plan was audacious. First, nighttime airborne and seaborne commando raids would capture two vital bridges, the Ponte dei Malati and the Ponte di Primosole. The 50th Division would then break through Axis defenses some 30 kilometers to the south, link up with the commandos, and strike out for Catania. Once again, the airborne drops went poorly. Both friendly and enemy anti-aircraft fire forced nearly 30% of the gliders to return to base, and only 200 men and 3 anti-tank guns dropped near their target. To make matters worse, they had dropped directly on top of the newly arrived, battle-hardened 1st Fallschirmjäger Division. This was a brutal stroke of bad luck, pitting lightly armed paratroopers against some of Germany's toughest soldiers. The British did manage to capture the Primosole Bridge, but immediately came under ferocious German attack. The British paratroopers, displaying incredible courage, used captured anti-tank guns and mines to repel the assaults, but casualties mounted, and ammunition ran perilously low. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to relocate to a hill south of the bridge, covering it from there until the 50th Division could arrive. However, the 50th Division, having expected to fight against less formidable Italian units, not hardened German paratroopers, found their progress painfully slow. Fighting was particularly tough in the dense vineyards and orange groves, terrain that favored the defenders and offered little visibility. A soldier of the 5th East Yorkshire Regiment recalled the claustrophobia and sudden danger. It wasn't possible to see more than 20 yards in the orange groves. Some unidentified troops were moving alongside a small wall. As we were debating who they might be, the question was solved by the rapid burr of a Spandau machine gun not very far away. This first-hand account paints a vivid picture of the disorienting, terrifying nature of close-quarters combat in such unforgiving terrain, where every rustle in the leaves could mean death. On July 14th, the 50th Division finally reached the bridge, but found the northern bank under solid German control. British troops waded across on July 15th, but German machine gunners and artillery soon pinned them down, preventing any significant breakthrough. Only a small Allied bridgehead was able to be formed, holding on tenuously. On July 17th, after tough fighting around the bridgehead, the British made another attempt towards Catania under a heavy creeping barrage. Sergeant Georg Schmitz of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division was on the receiving end. We survived the 1.5-hour barrage well under the cover of the tank trench. We had orders not to open fire until gave the order. Thus, without a shot being fired from our side, the attacking enemy came unhindered into the range of fire of our infantry weapons. But then he was met by our furious defensive fire. The attacker had very heavy losses, and the attack was beaten off. This harrowing account perfectly illustrates the brutal effectiveness of German defensive tactics, their discipline under fire, and the sheer human cost of frontal assaults against well-entrenched positions. It speaks to the psychological torment of enduring a barrage, the nerve required to hold fire, and the devastating impact of a perfectly timed counterattack. The British attacked again on July 18th, but were unable to break through to Catania or the nearby aerodrome. The fierce German resistance, particularly from the 1st Fallschirmjäger, had proven too strong. The next day, Montgomery, recognizing the futility of further direct assaults, abandoned the plan for a swift capture of Catania and shifted the focus to his planned swing around Mount Etna. But what was envisioned as a speedy thrust also devolved into an arduous slog. On July 17th, the Canadians pushed along Highway 124 but were stopped short of Enna by tenacious resistance. Axis forces had already shifted their positions to counter this move. Hube, demonstrating his strategic acumen, decided to abandon the west of Sicily and fall back to a series of formidable defensive lines centered around Mount Etna, a natural fortress. His plan was now clear: defend Sicily for as long as possible, inflicting maximum casualties before withdrawing his precious forces across the Messina Straits into Italy. This was not a retreat in the traditional sense. It was a disciplined, phased withdrawal designed to preserve fighting strength. German and Italian rearguard units continued to contest town after town, extracting a heavy price for every meter of Allied advance. Demolitions and booby traps further slowed the Allied progress, turning every road and village into a potential death trap. These delaying tactics were incredibly effective, bleeding the Allied advance and buying crucial time for the evacuation. It was a masterclass in defensive warfare, turning the natural terrain of Sicily into a strategic asset. With Montgomery bogged down, Patton sensed an opportunity. Ever the opportunist, he demanded that U.S. forces be given a more significant objective, arguing there was a political necessity for the American public to see their troops at work. He understood the optics of war as much as its tactics. Alexander, under pressure and perhaps weary of the constant rivalry, conceded and allowed Patton to capture Palermo, the major port and largest city on the island. This was the green light Patton needed, and his forces, particularly the 2nd Armored Division, now raced forward, a stark contrast to the grinding pace of the British advance. They encountered isolated pockets of mostly Italian troops who, demoralized and often poorly supplied, frequently surrendered after offering only token resistance. Colonel James Gavin of the 82nd Airborne, witnessing this rapid advance, recalled, "It was unlike anything else I'd encountered during the war. Suddenly, a machine gun or anti-tank weapon would open up, and then the white flags would appear. A shot had been fired for honor, but it was just as likely to cause casualties as a shot fired in anger." This vivid description captures the peculiar nature of this phase of the campaign, where the Italian will to fight was rapidly eroding, replaced by a desperate desire to survive. It's a stark contrast to the fanatical German resistance encountered elsewhere. The U.S. troops also had another unexpected advantage in their drive across Sicily. Large numbers of American soldiers were Italian Americans, some with deep Sicilian heritage. They occasionally received a warm reception from locals, who saw them not just as invaders, but as relatives, or at least familiar faces. These connections were invaluable, allowing them to gain important intelligence and build rapport. U.S. intelligence also made astute use of criminal connections among New York mafia families with ties to Sicily. Local Sicilian mafia, fiercely opposed to Mussolini's fascist regime, proved willing to help, gathering intelligence and guiding Allied troops through treacherous mountain passes, providing a unique and controversial edge. This highlights the complex socio-political landscape of wartime Sicily, where loyalties were not always to the state, but to family, community, and even criminal networks. German troops, in stark contrast, reported a hostile attitude toward their continued presence. German paratrooper Joseph Klein recalled the response to his unit's demolitions work. Some civilians emerged as spokesmen, waving old hunting rifles around and assuming a threatening posture. The kerfuffle did not end until our platoon sergeant had a machine gun group with an MG-42 set up on the market square. This chilling anecdote underscores the resentment of the local population towards the German occupation and the ruthless pragmatism of the German military in suppressing dissent. On at least one occasion, tensions tragically spilled over into murder, with the Hermann Göring division shooting 16 Italian men in Castiglione di Sicilia, likely in retaliation for supposed thefts. Such incidents reveal the darker side of occupation, the brutal realities faced by civilians caught in the crossfire, and the moral compromises made in the crucible of war. By July 22nd, the Americans had taken Palermo, and the Allies had practically cut the island in two at Termini Imerese. U.S. troops took a staggering 50,000 Italian prisoners, with only 272 casualties, a testament to the speed of their advance and the collapse of Italian resistance in the West. Patton, now reveling in his success, immediately directed his troops along northern Sicily to participate in the final attack towards Messina. For him, it had now explicitly become a race, a highly publicized and ego-driven dash to see whether the Americans or the British would reach Messina first. This personal rivalry, while perhaps motivating, would also lead to significant friction and questionable tactical decisions. Meanwhile, back in Rome, the war took an unexpected and dramatic turn. On July 25th, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, was voted out of the fascist Grand Council and arrested, his time as the absolute ruler of Italy abruptly over. King Victor Emmanuel III assumed full constitutional powers. Mussolini had faced a growing conspiracy from within his own general staff, disillusioned by the war's failures. The Sicilian invasion, coupled with the relentless Allied bombing of mainland Italy, acted as the final nail in his political coffin. His removal sent shockwaves across Europe, fundamentally altering the political landscape of the war. But with Hitler watching closely, Italy, for the time being, vowed to continue the struggle. Mussolini's removal also ended any pretense of Italian command in Sicily. General Hube now fully oversaw the entire German withdrawal and evacuation, a task he would execute with remarkable precision and effectiveness. His troops continued to fight punishing rearguard actions towards the Etna line, based around the formidable Centuripe position. Meanwhile, U.S. troops advanced towards Troina, another prepared German defensive point. Carefully positioned German anti-tank guns, machine guns, and tanks took a heavy toll, turning every mountain pass and village into a fortress. In many cases, small, disciplined groups of Axis troops managed to delay entire Allied divisions in the narrow mountain roads. proving that superior numbers alone are not enough against determined defenders in favorable terrain. This phase of the campaign became a brutal, grinding slog, a testament to the effectiveness of German defensive tactics. Progress was also hampered by the Allies' persistent issues with close air support coordination. The process of requesting airstrikes was slow and convoluted, often requiring multiple layers of approval, and in any case, fragile radio equipment frequently broke down or couldn't get through the mountainous terrain. Confused boundaries between U.S. and British units further compounded the problem. In a particularly egregious example, as the British 30 Corps assaulted Centuripe, fighter bombers of the U.S. 12th Air Support Command attacked them by mistake. Lieutenant General Oliver Leese, commander of the 30 Corps, furiously phoned General Omar Bradley to complain. "What have we done that your chaps would want to bomb us? They've hit right on top of my headquarters. They have really plastered the town." This incident, a painful echo of the earlier friendly fire catastrophe, underscored the critical need for clearer communication, better training, and integrated command structures. It was a costly lesson, paid for in blood and morale. Exhausted and often inexperienced Allied units were nearing their breaking point. Major Derek Stackpoole of the 7th Royal Marines, an entirely green formation, recalled an attack on Taormina. "My God, when I think of the things that went wrong, the unpreparedness and the rush and hurry of the whole blasted amateurish mess-up, poor old 7th RM, never have so many been buggered about by so few." This raw, honest assessment captures the frustration, the disorganization, and the immense pressure felt by frontline soldiers enduring the brutal realities of combat. It's a powerful counterpoint to the sanitized narratives of war, revealing the gritty, chaotic truth. Only the timely release of experienced units from North Africa, combined with the arrival of the British 78th Battle Axe Division, finally broke the deadlock. These seasoned troops, hardened by earlier campaigns, brought much-needed expertise and resolve. The British and Canadians, with renewed vigor, captured Centuripe and its dominating heights on August 1st. On August 6th, the U.S. 1st Division finally captured Troina, but only after the Axis counterattacked no less than 24 times, a testament to the ferocity of the German defense. With these two pivotal positions lost, General Hube knew that the battle for Sicily was effectively over. He sped up preparations for the full evacuation, but continued his punishing rearguard actions, extracting maximum casualties and buying precious time. To assist the British 3rd Division, which was especially held up at Montefertello along the coast, Patton ordered a series of risky amphibious landings behind enemy lines. These end runs, conducted on August 8th, 11th, and 16th, were designed to outflank German positions and ease the advance. While inherently dangerous, they proved effective, cutting off retreating elements and forcing the Germans to abandon well-prepared defensive positions. The British also conducted their own landing on August 16th, hoping to cut off retreating elements of the Hermann Göring Division, but were ultimately unable to catch them. Both Allied forces now converged on Messina, the final objective. During the night of August 16th, the vanguard of the U.S. 3rd Division entered the outskirts. General Hube's incredibly well-organized evacuation, Operation Lehrgang, was finally coming to an end. The narrow straits of Messina, with their coastal guns and large anti-aircraft forces, meant that the Allied forces, despite their overwhelming numbers, mostly couldn't disrupt the German evacuation. It was a masterclass in strategic retreat, a testament to Hube's skill and the discipline of his troops. On August 17th, Hube's command, the last of the German units, successfully left Sicily. The Allies had won the island, But the Germans had preserved a significant portion of their fighting strength. Preparing to fight another day on the Italian mainland, Operation Husky came at a high cost. Of the eventual 460,000 Allied troops in Sicily, around 5,000 were killed and up to 16,000 wounded. An additional 3,500 were missing. Of those killed, a disproportionate 1,400 were paratroopers, highlighting the brutality of their particular role in the invasion. German losses were substantial: 4,500 killed, 13,500 wounded, and around 10,000 missing or captured. Italian losses were especially high, reflecting the collapse of their army. 4,750 Italian troops killed, 5,000 wounded, and a staggering 152,000 missing or captured, many of whom simply surrendered en masse. The loss of Sicily also decimated Axis air units. In July 1943 alone, 711 German aircraft were lost in the Mediterranean theater, and the Italian Regia Aeronautica was effectively dissolved after Husky. This was a high price for the limited damage they were able to inflict, demonstrating the overwhelming air superiority achieved by the Allies. But despite these results, Operation Husky was riddled with Allied complaints. As the first major joint operation of its kind, it exposed deep-seated issues. There was poor coordination, especially between different branches of the military, and animosity and a profound lack of communication between commanders. While tactical air superiority improved as the invasion went on, Army commanders consistently claimed that they rarely saw friendly air cover when they needed it most. Air commanders, in turn, replied that they were attacking strategic targets further to the rear, contributing to overall air superiority. This fundamental disagreement highlights the challenges of integrating disparate forces with different operational objectives. Better communication regarding objectives and methods may have smoothed over these tensions, but the lessons were hard-won. Field Marshal Alexander was accused of giving Montgomery too much control and, crucially, undervaluing the potential of U.S. troops, contributing to Patton's frustrations. General Patton himself, a figure of immense controversy, was criticized by both superiors and subordinates. General Omar Bradley, who served under Patton, accused him of recklessness with the lives of his men, especially in his self-imposed race to beat Montgomery to Messina, a race some historians suggest Montgomery wasn't even aware of. This reveals the profound impact of ego and personal ambition on strategic decisions and the human cost of such rivalries. News also emerged of two deeply disturbing incidents that further tarnished Patton's legacy. In one, he slapped enlisted men suffering from shell shock, now recognized as PTSD, in field hospitals, accusing them of cowardice. These incidents sparked outrage and nearly ended his career. More chillingly, at Biscari, often misidentified as Piscotti, on July 14th, U.S. troops massacred 73 Axis prisoners. The perpetrators claimed Patton had ordered no prisoners to be taken, something Patton vehemently denied. These dark episodes force us to confront the moral ambiguities of war, the immense pressures on soldiers, and the catastrophic consequences when discipline breaks down or when leadership, even from a celebrated commander, veers into recklessness. They remind us that even in a just war, atrocities can occur, and accountability is paramount. There were also missed Allied opportunities. General Hube's phased withdrawal, executed with incredible precision, preserved a significant portion of his fighting strength. In the first 17 days of August, the Axis successfully evacuated 100,000 troops, 10,000 vehicles, 200 artillery guns, and 47 tanks to Italy, where they would continue the struggle. While Sicily was lost, the core of the German defense was saved, prolonging the war on the Italian mainland This demonstrated the strategic value of a well-executed retreat, saving irreplaceable resources and manpower. However, the Allies also learned invaluable lessons from their mistakes, lessons that would directly inform future operations. For example, to prevent a repeat of the friendly fire incidents, almost all Allied aircraft involved in the Normandy invasions would display clear invasion stripes, distinctive black and white markings that made identification easier. Airborne operations would benefit from longer planning periods and the wider use of Pathfinder units to guide and paratroopers, dramatically improving accuracy and reducing casualties. Tactical improvements included the development of more rugged and reliable radios, and clearer, more direct channels for requesting air support, addressing the crucial communication breakdowns experienced in Sicily. These weren't minor tweaks. They were fundamental reforms that would make future combined arms operations far more effective and less costly. Arguably, though, the biggest outcome of Operation Husky was also a mostly unintended one: the removal of Mussolini. This dramatic political shift immediately opened the profound question of Italy's continued role in the war. While the Allied demand for unconditional surrender remained, Italy seemed reluctant to surrender immediately, leading to a period of intense political maneuvering and ultimately a brutal and protracted battle for Italy itself. Many of the units on both sides who had fought so fiercely in Sicily would soon meet again on new, equally bloody battlefields across the Italian peninsula. Operation Husky, for all its flaws and internal struggles, became a foundational experience for the Western Allies. Naval landings with airborne support became a staple of Allied strategy in Western Europe until the very end of the Second World War. The biggest single-day airborne drop, in fact, happened on German soil in 1945, when the 21st Army Group under Bernard Montgomery had to cross the Rhine north of the Ruhr region in the last set-piece battle on the Western Front. The Allies fought their way from the Dutch border to the last natural barrier before the heartland of the Reich, the mighty Rhine River. So, what clear lesson can we take away from Operation Husky? It's multifaceted. First, it highlights the immense complexity of coalition warfare, where even allies with a shared objective can be hampered by personal rivalries, differing doctrines, and communication breakdowns. True unity of command and purpose, while often elusive, is absolutely vital. Second, it underscores the unforgiving nature of combat, where the best-laid plans can unravel in an instant due to unforeseen circumstances, human error, or the sheer chaos of battle. The catastrophic airborne drops and friendly fire incidents serve as powerful tragic reminders of this. Third, it reveals the critical importance of adaptable leadership. Commanders like Hube, in their strategic retreats, demonstrated how to preserve fighting strength even in defeat, while Allied commanders grappled with adapting to terrain, enemy tactics, and their own internal friction. Ultimately, Husky was a crucible. It tested men, machines, and the very concept of an Allied command. It exposed flaws, exacted a heavy toll, but crucially, it forced the Allies to learn, adapt, and evolve. It was a messy, imperfect victory, but one that provided invaluable lessons that would ultimately pave the way for D-Day and the final victory in Europe. It stands as a powerful testament to human resilience in the face of chaos, the enduring power of deception, and the eternal, brutal dance between strategy and sacrifice that defines the story of war. It reminds us that history is not just about triumph, but about the painful, often bloody process of learning to win.